Hi Kelly, how are you?
Good, thanks. Hey Carol, are you there?
Yes.
Can I do a quick screen sharing test?
Yes, I will stop sharing for you.
I'm gonna do, let's see here. So many things open.
I know
Whoa.
that. Yes,
All right.
it looks
And
perfect. I can read it
okay.
clearly too.
Yeah. Well, and I can see you. Sometimes you disappear and sometimes you don't. So I'll take that as it comes. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Of course.
Hi Rob, hi Tim, how are you?
Happy Monday, Ken. I'll see you tomorrow too, huh?
I know, yes. And I tell you what, it's already been a Monday, so yeah, happy Monday indeed.
Hey, on my end too, man. Seriously.
Yeah. Are you going to be out most of the day in Pendleton tomorrow?
Yeah, well, I mean, minus the drive to and from. So I'll probably
Yeah.
be there around 10 a.m., hang out until you're done, and then probably take off after that.
Yeah, I'll be headed back after I wrap up, but I'm not sure exactly when I'll get out yet, but trying to make it out for your talk too. It's a little longer of a drive from down here.
Yeah.
Hi Carl, and I think I saw Lisa pop in as well. We're still waiting on our chair, but it looks like as folks come in, we're pretty close to getting started as soon as Paul arrives. There's Jessica Beach. And for folks who are waiting on the meeting to get started, we have most of our commissioners here. We're waiting on our chair. I will give him another couple minutes and then we can go ahead and get started.
Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance. I'm having to take this meeting from my car and can't find a great angle. So if you're licking up my nose or something like that, I'm so sorry.
There's never a good way to get an angle in the car. So yeah, we'll give you some grace there. And it looks like Chair Solomon just joined us. Paul, we are ready to go whenever you are, and we can call the roll.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay? Super. Sorry about that. I had some technical difficulties. Yes. Let's go ahead and get started. Today is the Monday, April 15th meeting of the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. Carol, would you do the honors of calling roll?
Of course. Commissioner Auxier, Commissioner Beach,
Present, and I apologize, I'm having issues with my camera today. I will try to work on that, but I am here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Present.
Commissioner Freeman,
I am here.
Commissioner McPherson,
Here.
Commissioner Norton,
Here.
Senator Przonski, and then Representative Lewis. And then Chair Solomon.
Present.
Thank you so much.
All right. Carol or Ken, do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
I do not have any public comment.
All right. Well, moving right along, I think the next item on the agenda is the Justice Reinvestment Program's 3% carve out for research funds. And I'm not sure who is presenting on this.
I am.
And who
Can
is
you hear
on?
me okay? Kelly. You must not
Okay.
be able to see me.
Kelly.
This is
Oh,
Kelly.
there you go.
Yep. All right. Let me see if I can share my screen, and I will share this with you. All right. Okay. I'm assuming everyone can see the presentation. Sounds like it. Okay. Thank you, Chair Solomon, commissioners. I'm Kelly Officer, Research Director at the CJC, and I have a short presentation for a final update on the Justice Reinvestment 3% research projects. Much of this is similar to what was presented in November. So we have some final updates and then a chance for any feedback or comments from you all on these projects. So first up is the Crime Victimization Survey. This is the same project that was presented in November with an updated budget. But as a reminder, the first survey was conducted in late 2020 and funded with the 1921 3% funds and provides victimization estimates for all Oregonians. And this project is to run the survey again for the second time. And so that will give us the first changeover time of victimization estimates. The project has to go through the state procurement process, and I am happy to report and cautiously optimistic that the timing for that is going fairly well. So that budget there is finalized and updated from the presentation in November. And please interrupt me with questions as I'm going along. This one is not that different from November. So
Kelly, I've got a question about this.
Yeah.
So the 434,000 for the survey, is that 2 years worth of work or 1 year's worth of work?
So that is a good question. Yeah, that is to run the survey again. And so that was put together the first time. The goal here is to run the survey at the same time as what was done in 2020. And so that was about October to January timeframe. So if we can get through this procurement process and keep it on the same timeline, that's what we would like to do. And then there is, so that's to run the survey. And then there is some back end work of getting the data compiled and to the CJC. So this would be done in a year. So this is just a 1-year project, but most of that funding is to actually administer the survey. There's a research design around that in terms of sending out postcard reminders and reach out for folks to take it. And then the process to administer and collect the data is what the majority of the funds would go to for this.
And how large is the survey? How many respondents have they had in the past?
I should know that off the top of my head for the one we did the last time, and I do not have that. I can get that information to you. I can say that the one that was done in 2020 had a better than expected response rate. So part of putting together these estimates is accounting for non-response rates of folks that are reached out to. And it was better than expected in 2020. And we did have more responses than we expected in 2020. So, in 2024, we're hoping to do just as well on that, but, things are going to look different. So we'll have to have some flexibility of that. So I can get you what those actual counts were. It is stratified, meaning that, we have kind of the statewide sample that is needed, but then also making sure we have enough from different regions across the state to do region estimates, and then also making sure we have enough sample from different demographic groups, age, gender, and race, to be able to provide solid estimates for that as well. So we were able to do that for the first survey, with a plan to do that again for the second survey. I see Ken, maybe my phone a friend here, with his hand up.
That is exactly the role I'm playing. whenever you're ready, Paul.
Yeah, I guess the final question I have is, how does this comport with the National Crime Victim Survey, if at all?
That is a very good question. Yes, the Bureau of Justice Statistics does a national crime victimization survey that provides nationwide estimates. Unfortunately, Oregon is not a big enough state to have a state-specific estimate within that. So while it does provide information across the nation and different demographic groups at a nation level, it doesn't give us any Oregon-specific information. The design is also a bit different as well. The Bureau of Justice Statistics spends about $40 million on their survey. And as you can see, our budget is much, much less than that. So we will not be knocking on people's doors, but can still get a estimate of victimization across the state.
Okay, thank you.
And just a couple things I jump in on is we do ask we try to ask similar questions for as much comparability as possible. And we also try to match our questions with different index crimes so we can compare them to crime rates that we get through other reporting programs. But Kelly's right. It's the methods that they use are so different as far as it's more kind of an interview-based style. It's also over time with a panel. And so it's impossible to recreate entirely, but at least it's comparable. And just to answer your earlier question, Chair, there were 4,239 completed surveys, 377 partials. Their target was only 3,500. So we definitely overperformed what we thought we would get when we actually began phoning out. And Kelly also mentioned we had a racial oversample. We had aimed to get 100 Black or African-American respondents. We did miss that target by 11, so we only had 89 completed. But we also targeted to get 400 Hispanic respondents. We got 394, so we got much closer there. And then we also met our targets for in other ways to make sure that things were regional and other things that we were looking for. So we're hoping to be able to replicate that success this time. The last one was during COVID, so maybe more people were at home and bored and willing to answer their phone. That's always actually kind of a question. So we'll see. But hopefully, it being one of the not quite as nice times of year in Oregon, we'll still catch people where they're willing to talk to us. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. That was just what I needed and didn't have on hand. The next study should also look familiar. This was presented in November as well. So this is the evaluation of the Strategic Treatment and Engagement Program, or STEP Court. And so as discussed in November, this is a somewhat unique specialty court focusing on violent felonies and also a focus on disparities in the criminal justice system. Fairly new, started in January 2023, but this is a really good time to do a robust evaluation of the program. You can see the components there. Process evaluation, outcome evaluation, cost benefit analysis. This is a longer term study. You can see the timeline there is about 3.5 years for every component listed there. And that budget is slightly updated there at $484,000. Okay, next up, this is unchanged from November. This is the Lane County, the Way Home study. But just as a reminder, this is to support a long-term study that's been happening on Lane County of permanent supportive housing. And there was a presentation on this in November. And the funds specifically from the 3% is for graduate students to conduct the work to survey participants. And so the budget there is the Lane County retained funds plus an additional $100,000 of funds from that 3% research project funding. And then finally is Multnomah County. This is different than what was presented in November. In November, Multnomah County had a proposal to evaluate the social work component of the program, and hopefully they'll be able to do it in the future. But after this fall of the budgets across the different departments that were going to be involved, the team realized the project really depended on researchers being able to dedicate a certain proportion of their time to the project. And it wasn't going to be possible with some of the budget components and other vacancy challenges there. And so they have revised the proposal to focus on their core justice reinvestment program and to do the process evaluation work described here. This program is coming up on 10 years, believe it or not. And so some of these components have been done previously as an internal effort for the researchers in Multnomah County, but they're outdated and a lot has changed since 2020. So they'd like to update some of these and then add some more components to further improve the program. And that will all be done with the secondary data analysis with the county and state level data. We CJC will help with some of the state level data there. And so the project is different and the budget is the same at $219,000. And then the final slide here is the total budget of the project. So you can see we're very close to what's available compared to what is requested across the different projects for the 3% funds. And so this was a final update today. Be happy to take feedback or questions or suggestions on these projects before we get them started.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Any questions or comments for Kelly or any of the other staff? All right, hearing none, carry on with the good work.
Thank you.
All right, and I think you're on deck next to talk about the crime trends.
Mm-hmm. I am. All right, next up, next test of screen sharing. Oh, I don't know why it looks like that. There we go. All right. Okay, next up, update on Oregon crime rates and the current trends of reported crimes in Oregon. So before we look into the trends, some information on where the data comes from. This is Uniform Crime Reporting data, or UCR data. This program is managed by the FBI, both the process to collect the data across states and all law enforcement agencies in every state, but also the definitions of the crimes that are collected. So the definitions aren't based on state statute codes, they're based on definitions set by the FBI to be consistent across different jurisdictions. So you can see the definitions there. Violent index crimes includes the 4 specific crimes listed there: murder and non-negligent manslaughter, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. So the sum of that is the violent index crime measure. And then the property index crime measure is burglary, larceny, theft, and motor vehicle theft. So you can see in bold there, we have listed, these are, this is incident crime data of crimes known to law enforcement. So if my car is stolen and I call into a law enforcement agency to report it as stolen, it will be included in this data. Now, if law enforcement is short-staffed and is not able to come take a report or even to investigate, I've still reported it as stolen, and so it will still be included in this data. If my car is never recovered and nobody is arrested, it'll still be included in this data that crime was reported. If I don't report to law enforcement that my car was stolen, then it's not going to be in the data. So there has to be a report made to law enforcement for it to be included. That can be over the phone, or a lot of agencies now have a online form that can be done to report these. So just an explanation of how the data is collected and what is required there.
Kelly,
Yeah.
quick question. So am I correct in recalling that not all police agencies in Oregon report data to the feds?
That is correct, but it's getting pretty close. So in 2021, there was a switch in the process in which it's done to a richer data source that has a lot more details. But there were some agencies that didn't have the capacity to take that on, or their system couldn't take on that additional requirement. And once again, I don't have it off the top of my head. I feel like we were above the 90% threshold. So 90% of the population covered. I think 90% of the agencies. When you looked at the agencies that weren't able to report, it's a lot of small, handful of officers, agencies. We did have all large agencies across the state participating in this program. In 2021, when that requirement started, it was terrible timing to have this requirement in 2021. So some other states were really struggling with including this information. And so the FBI at that time did do some work to come up with estimates of crime for agencies that were not able to report. It has improved. Oregon is still above the national rate, but a lot of those other states have been able to come up. And so I think it's above the 80% measure, but I'd want to double check that. So it has improved.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And so with this UCR measure, a strength here is that it's consistent across different states, across different jurisdictions. And then a challenge is the lag in the data. It does take the FBI and the Bureau of Justice Statistics a good amount of time to release the data. It'd be great if it came out more often, but under the current structure, that is a challenge there. So we'll start with some historical trends over time. We have here 60 years of this data. And here we have Oregon and the US total rate. We can compare other states, can compare other agencies across these measures. So again, that's one of the benefits of this data, is that consistency. So here on the left is the violent index crime rate per 1,000 population. Oregon is the blue dash line, and then the US total is that red solid line. So you can see, historically, Oregon has had a lower violent crime rate than that US total. For the nation, you can see that the violent index crime rate peaked in the early 90s and then has dropped substantially. Oregon looks a little bit different, fairly high rate for Oregon through the mid 80s and mid 90s, and then again showing that pretty dramatic drop. Oregon hit, I believe it's 2013, that is that most recent kind of low point. And then you can see there is a gradual increase through to 2020, but still substantially below what it was in the mid 90s. The property index crime rate is a little bit different trend. You can see Oregon is historically above the national rate. I think it's 2011 where it went just below, and only for 1 year. But otherwise above. And so Oregon had a peak in the late 80s and mid 90s, and again a dramatic drop to 2000 in that property index crime rate. So we have this information for other states and really have this long-term trend of crime rates. We'll get into the more recent data here in a couple slides, and I'll pause for questions. Okay, hearing none, we'll come back if needed. So for the most recent statewide data we have for Oregon is 2022 calendar year data. So there's that lag that is the challenge mentioned there. This data was released in mid-October 2023. So that's kind of the cycle. This year in the fall, we'll receive the 2023 data. So when we're thinking about having the most recent data for policy discussions, this lag here is a challenge. When we do get that data, we get the most recent year. A lot of times we're comparing to the year previously, which is what we have in this table here. So we have Oregon and other Western states, 2022 compared to 2021. Again, we have that consistency across the states and can compare to that national total there. So most recent that we have, you can see for violent crime, Oregon slightly increased at 0.3%, where that national rate dropped by about 1.5%. Our neighbors to the north, Washington, had a nearly 12% increase in violent index crime. California, about a 4% increase, where you can see states like Montana, New Mexico, and Utah saw a decline. And property crime looks different. So from 2021 to 2022 in Oregon, property crime increased 9%, where that US total was closer to 6.5%. Again, Washington up by 10.5% and California up by 8%. And then other states saw a drop in that time. So we see different trends for property in violent crime. But this is good context, but it is hard to see some of the more important nuances, and we do have that lag. So for large cities in Oregon, that data is released quarterly, so we can get more recent information for large cities. So I'll show that next. Okay, so for the large cities in Oregon, oops. Uh-oh. Am I still sharing?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. Thank you. Here we go. Okay, so large cities with a population over 100,000 in Oregon is Eugene, Gresham, Hillsborough, Portland, and Salem. Bend was added in 2019, so it's not on this line since we went back to 2017. So here we have the 6-month intervals of reported crime for Oregon's largest cities on the chart here. So you can see from 2017 to 2019, violent crime did increase by 9.5%. So was increasing before the pandemic. And then you can see that first 6 months in 2020, a dramatic drop there of about 16.5%, followed by steady increases for the next 6-month reporting periods, with that peak that you see there in late 2021. And so that was concerning to have violent crime increase pretty steadily at that time. It did subside, so you can see it does come back down in 2022. The most recent 6-month period, the end of 2023, does show an increase from the previous period. It does look to be consistent with those pre-pandemic trends. So it has increased over the last 6 months. However, it's below that peak that occurred in late 2021.
And so Kelly, can you talk to us about the data source here? So what you shared before was kind of statewide totals, UCR data up to 2022. And this has 22 to 23 data in it that you're just pulling for the large cities that are listed here.
That is correct. Yes, this is the sum of the large cities. Let's see, for the 5 large cities. We do get more recent updates for reported crime in large cities, so that can kind of give us a little bit of a leading indicator of what's happening, at least in Oregon's larger cities, for reported crime. So some of those 5 cities of crime trends in this 2017 to 2023 window. If we wanted to look at this for the statewide levels, we'd only have it through 2022, which is actually what is on the previous slide.
And is it possible to get a snapshot of the individual cities?
Oh, thank you. You have you've set me up for
Oh.
2 slides from now. It's perfect.
Okay, cool.
So this is violent crime. So this is the sum of the 5 largest cities of violent crime trends through this time period. And then this next slide is the same information only for property crime. So again, some of the large cities just for property crime. So we can see that before the pandemic, there was a slight decline in property crime, consistent with those longer term trends that we saw on the previous slide. And so that after that initial COVID response, we don't see an increase, but then starting in late 2021 and early 2022, a dramatic increase of about 28.5% in reported property crime in Oregon's large cities. Now that does subside. We see that in late 2022, it does subside. The most recent 6 months, we have seen about a 10% increase from that previous time period. That has occurred, but it is lower than that peak that we saw in late 2021 and early 2022. So again, cautiously optimistic that these pretty substantial increases have somewhat subsided, although we are seeing a little tick up in the last 6 months.
And so Kelly, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So we've had this uptick, but when we look at the trends over the last 20 years, we're still at about half of where we were at the height of our property crime rate numbers. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. If we were to do a longer term look, so compare mid 90s to present day, it would drop by about half. Now, this increase in late 2021, early 2022, that more local increase is pretty substantial, the 28.5%, but we have seen it come back down. And if we were to look at this rate, this most recent 6-month rate, July to December 2021, compared to that longer term trend, it would be down substantially.
Got it.
Okay, and then finally, okay, a lot of lines, a lot of information here, but just to show that the property crime trends vary across these 6 cities. So this chart has a lot going on here, but shows you each city is somewhat different. So looking here on the left at the violent crime information, Portland is the dark blue line, and Portland's on a separate scale. So Portland does have the highest rate, but to get it to fit on the graph, it's on a separate scale there on the right-hand side. And then the other 5 cities are on the scale on the left-hand side. So the dark blue line for Portland, the trend is similar to what we saw for the combined cities. Makes sense. Portland's the largest city. We do get that peak in early 2021 and then do see it come down with somewhat of an increase in the most recent 6 months. Salem is here in the yellow. Looks a little bit different. That peak occurs in early 2022. So occurs a little bit later, but again, we see that it subsides and comes down a little bit from there. And then you can see the property crime looks a little bit different, right? Again, looking at Portland, that peak in late 2021, early 2022, and then does come down from there. Again, the yellow is Salem and the red is Eugene. So you see Salem and Eugene both peak in early 2021 and then show a drop from there. So each city here does look different. So if you combine these 6 cities, that's about 30% of the state's population. So it gives us somewhat of an indicator of what crime is doing for a more recent time period. And we'll have the state level data out in the fall for 2023. And that concludes my presentation on the latest information for the reported crime to law enforcement for Oregon and Oregon's large cities.
One final question from me anyway. So I noticed that Gresham and Hillsborough are like way below the higher cities. Has that been a pretty consistent trend across the years?
That's a good question. I should have clarified. So this chart is just showing counts of reported crime. So we've not accounted for population.
Okay, so
here.
it's not per 100,000.
It is not. No.
Okay,
So
got it. Got it.
The one where we compared to the nation, of course, was scaled per population, but this is not. But you can see the trends, right? You can see the change over time, and the relative peaks occurring within that. You know, Hillsborough's trends, you know, look quite different from Portland, and so that does provide some important context there for that.
Great. Good stuff. Anybody else have questions or comments for Kelly about the UCR data?
Vice Chair Bovet has his hand up.
Oh, there we go.
Just a
Go
real
ahead.
quick question, maybe for another next month or something. I noticed some news stories over the weekend. I actually didn't have time to read them about the murder rates nationally dropping in many places, but not in other places. And I know we've spent some money, some significant money, CJC has to try to study what's going on there. I don't know if maybe in a future meeting we could actually look at the murder rates because there seems to be some dynamic things happening, and I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
Yes, we'd be happy to do that. What's great about this UCR data is that we do have that. Here we're showing just the total of the violent index crime, but we do have murder specifically. And for large cities across the nation can show the murder rate changes over time. You know, on this chart here, we have the 6 large cities. We could look at the murder rate for these 6 large cities, but then we do get into the low counts, right? When we look at murders in Bend, Eugene, and Gresham, just a handful. And so those trends over time can start to really, really bounce quickly. But if we're looking at large cities, then we can pull that apart and show those most recent trends. And then also we'll have some more recent information for the large cities as well.
Great. Unless there are any other questions, I think we are good. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, commissioners.
All right. I believe we're going to hear from Rima about the 23-25 illegal marijuana market enforcement grant fund allocations.
Good afternoon, Chair Solomon, commissioners. I'm Rima Atung. Thank you so much for letting me present today. I just want to note before we get started, I'm trying to upload my presentation now. We're kind of on the road. Deschutes County DA's office graciously let us borrow a conference room because we're on our way to a conference right now. So if there's any audio, video issues, please let me know. And I apologize in advance. So let's just, hopefully my presentation will load here. It's taking a minute.
Well, just so you know, so far we can hear and see you just fine.
Great, I'm glad to hear it. All right, it looks like it came up.
Yep.
Excellent. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is the Grant Review Committee recommendations for the Illegal Marijuana Market Enforcement Grant Program's 2023 to 2025 funding allocation. And just a quick reminder before we jump in. So, you know, CJC staff do all of the review, prepping of the information, going through any applications or grant budget requests, all of that stuff at the front end. The Grant Review Committee, which met on the 25th of March, goes through our presentation and our staff analysis and develops their own recommendations for what should be done with the allocation in this case. And then the commission's role is to consider all of this information and then make the full ultimate funding recommendation. So that's what we're here to do today. And I just wanted to quickly kind of review a high level of what the GRC went through to develop these recommendations, and then we'll get to the recommendations themselves. So just to kind of orient us all, this is the membership of the Grant Review Committee for the Illegal Marijuana Market Enforcement Grant. You know, Vice Chair Bovet is on the GRC, we also have representation from Oregon State Police, Polk County District Attorney's Office, Oregon Department of Agriculture, a couple of our CBO or victim service folks from UNETE or, the Department of Justice were on there as well, Oregon State Sheriff's Association. So it was a very knowledgeable group. The majority of who actually have served on the GRC for quite a few years and have, developed a lot of understanding of the grantees and of the landscape for this funding as well. So please stop me at any time if you have any questions or comments also. So as I mentioned, the GRC went through a bunch of information to develop these recommendations. We did a review of the grant program background, the funding allocations for, previous years as well as this year, which is $11 million. A review of who's eligible to receive these funds and the rules related to the funding. We did a review, especially of the previous 2 grant cycles for 2021 to 2023, which consisted of a regular funding cycle and then a $22 million infusion of funds that we call the special cycle awards. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. We looked at the gap that exists in funding for the folks that were funded through that 2021-2023 funding cycle, the budget requests that those folks submitted in response to that gap in funding, what we did as staff to analyze all of this information, and then we talked about a number of different funding allocations. And just a reminder, so folks that are eligible for the marijuana funds are cities and counties, units of local government, community-based organizations, and a combination of any of the above. And just a reminder, some of the definitions have slightly changed for these in the specifics in the rules that were just approved for the marijuana grant, but this is generally, who is eligible. There are some funding priorities already established in the program statute and rules. The legislative priorities related to this grant are to, focus program funds in rural areas for grantees that are combating large-scale operations, organized crime, diversion of marijuana outside of Oregon, and then folks that are providing services in response to the ongoing humanitarian crisis associated with the illegal marijuana cultivation and distribution. The commission also has additional funding priorities that are outlined for this program. So the funding is to go to training opportunities that assist the applicants in addressing illegal marijuana markets, addressing cases that require complex financial accounting, tracking outcomes, collaborating with other agencies and organizations, and then providing trauma-informed and culturally and linguistically specific and responsive services to persons affected by the humanitarian crisis. So I wanted to kind of go back to this, the 2 prior funding cycles that I kind of mentioned. So in 2021 and 2022, we had 2 sets of funds that were available. There was the $6 million in regular program funds, and there was this infusion of funds, $22 million that was for law enforcement, and then $6 million or $20 million, the $6 million that was set aside for community-based organizations. We got a number of applicants for all of that money, that huge infusion of funds, and we were able to award actually all of the folks that applied, and that consisted of 10 law enforcement grantees serving 11 counties, and then 2 community-based organizations, or actually one is a consortium of 6 community-based organizations that are providing a whole spectrum of legal and support services for individuals that are impacted by the illegal marijuana grows. Because there was just this large amount of funding available that was kind of out of the normal grant cycle, what happened was the project period for those folks was extended. Generally, we fund things for, within the biennium. In this instance, the project period was extended for some folks up to 46 months. So it's almost twice as long as the normal biennium. And at the same time, we received more, the amount of funding requested was actually still about 7 million above what we had available. So what the GRC and commission decided to do at that time was to apply funding reduction for all of the folks that applied. And there was a methodology behind it to kind of mete it out based on the application. So with this extended project period and the fact that all of the grantees that were awarded got less funding than they requested, there kind of exists this gap in funding for current grantees. So, when we went out and spoke to people doing site visits last year, it was raised as a concern that folks may not have the amount of funds that they need to get all the way to the end of the current grant period, which ends December 31st, 2025. So this was all information that the GRC also looked at in depth. Since there is this gap in funding, what we did prior to the GRC meeting was we put out kind of a broad advertisement to our current grantees and let them request whatever funding that they thought they would need to the end of the grant period to either maintain their current program as is or maintain it and expand it. So as part of this budget request process, they actually did a number of different steps. They submitted, the Excel budget request form that outlined what funds they were requesting, any changes to their current approved budget, all of that. We did one-on-one meetings with every single person to review every line item, discuss whether or not it was appropriate based on the time frame, what they were requesting, what their current project is. And then they also completed a short form application, which went back to the commission and legislative priorities for the grant and had them justify how these additional funds fit in with those priorities. So we took all of that information, and this is kind of a summary of the funds that were requested. As you can see, they're broken out into these categories: maintain program, expand program. The third column here, carryover funds, is actually the amount of funding that they currently still have in their contract. So for example, Polk County, they estimated based on their staffing needs and everything that they'll need $621,000 to maintain their program, keep staff as is. They also requested $323 in additional funds on top of that. And then they still had about $740,000. So we subtracted that out and came up with this additional fund requested amount for each grantee that shows how much they actually need based on what was requested. So do folks have any questions or comments at this point? No?
Well, it seems like there's, quite a bit of disparity in what the county's asked for.
Yep.
In terms of expanding the programs, and I'm curious about that. Can you fill in the blanks a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the needs vary a lot based on location and what resources they already have available. In terms of, I guess just backtracking a little bit, maintain program, we went through on a line item by line item basis and said, this staff person is already funded by the grant and they're just requesting funds till the end of the grant period. That's maintain. They ask for anything new, any new staff, any new equipment that wasn't already approved, then that goes into the expand program column. For a lot of these, they're just looking to maintain the current staffing and then maybe get a little bit more equipment or add 1 or 2 additional staff. There are a few notable cases like Washington County, or not Washington, sorry. Columbia County. You know, some of the larger asks are because they're having different circumstances in their county. For example, they just asked for overtime initially. So their total cost that they were originally approved for was very low. But, you know, in that circumstance, their county funds are no longer funding their team as of the end of this fiscal year. So they're asking for funds to support their full team moving forward. So that could be part of it. And that's generally like some of the biggest disparities. Some of the dollar amounts are just based on the size of the program.
So one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I don't have as much history with this program, is it seems to me that we have a practice in the state of the legislature allocating money, creating successful programs, and then as they expand, the money stays flat and we struggle to fund them. And I don't know how much this has grown since inception, and whether that's a trend here like we see with the specialty courts. And I see Vice Chair Babette has his hand up.
Yeah, so to your point, I think there has been that big infusion of funds did allow programs to grow. A lot of these counties wouldn't have a program at all without these funds. I think overall, our grantees have been very mindful of this issue that you're bringing up. For example, Jackson County has one of the largest teams, right? And their request actually, no, they need funds to maintain their staff because of that gap in funding. They're not going to be able to fund their full team, but they're also building in actually a reduction because there's uncertainties about the total amount of funds available going forward. So I think one thing to note, going back to your earlier question, Chair Solomon, is for the most part, the folks requested maybe 1 or 2 additional staff as a program expansion. They were very conservative overall. So, you know, a lot of, and we were very conservative in our interpretation. So anything that wasn't like a line item that was initially approved, even if it fit in with the project, if it wasn't initially approved in their application, we dumped it into expand program. And when we actually went through with the GRC, we went through line item by line item. And there were the beginning discussion before we did that, folks were kind of split between whether it was appropriate to consider, you know, allocating funds to maintain and expand. And I think by the end, even the things that were listed under expansion were very directly related to the program. So it didn't seem appropriate at that point to break it out. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, partially.
Okay.
Rob, did you have further comment or something you wanted to share related to this, Rob?
I did. I was going to try to answer your question from a more 50,000 foot vantage point, since I've been pretty integrally involved in this since its inception. This particular challenge of making sure we eradicate the large illicit grows that really compromise the integrity of our 3 regulated cannabis systems has gone through very distinct phases, dating back to, well, about 10 years ago. So what this grant program derives its primary funding from, for what I call baseline, $6 million, is basically off the top of net marijuana tax proceeds, which is logical. You use marijuana tax proceeds to make sure the marijuana programs work. But that's at a baseline of $6 million. And then we ran into an issue of very large multinational drug trafficking organizations moving into primarily Southwest Oregon, Jackson and Josephine County at first, and then metastasizing out to Douglas and Coos and spreading up the Willamette Valley and then over with lots of labor trafficking, violence, and environmental harm. And so we went to the legislature and asked them to supplement that baseline on a biennial basis. We've done that a couple of times now. They did that once surgically in between, just to provide the additional funding for ramping up additional issues. We're now in kind of what I call phase 3 of this, where we have made some significant progress, but the problem still is extant. So you'll probably see a bunch of folks going into the 2025 session saying, yes, we made a lot of progress, but we need more than the baseline still until we can really eradicate this particular challenge. So I don't know if that helps, Paul, from a 50,000 foot vantage point, but basically the legislature through both the E-Board and through the judiciary committees are kind of bird dogging this. We hope to be able at some point in time to get it back down to level again. And if we can just have the $6 million, do the baseline and make sure we can, target and eradicate the things that are, I could call the regular baseline challenges. But right now we're facing more of the extraordinary challenge, and it's ongoing. So that's hopefully helps.
Yeah, no, that was very helpful. So another question is how are these programs being evaluated, if they're being evaluated? Are there any metrics associated with the work that they're doing?
Yeah, so we do collect program data from them. They submit quarterly reports, which include, for example, the number of incidents that they respond to or warrants served on these illegal grows, folks that are arrested, court case information so we can track the outcome of the court cases, amount of illegal drugs, including marijuana and, guns and other things that are seized or appropriated during that process. On the CBO or service side, they report on the number of folks that come in and receive different legal services, different types of humanitarian assistance like housing, food funds, and that sort of thing. It is a relatively new grant program, so and the reporting changed. So we have the program report from last year, which has kind of more comprehensive data that was published the first of this year. We're hoping that we'll be able to build on that. Right now, it's just sort of information, but there's not really enough years available to do any kind of, to be able to call it performance data yet. It's just kind of gathering it on our end to see what the landscape looks like. But we are collecting data.
Great. All right. What else do you have to share about this?
Okay. So again, the GRC reviewed all of this information and talked through a number of different scenarios, just kind of on its simplest level. The question was how to allocate this 11 million. Do we completely fund these budget requests, which sum to 9.3 million, and then allocate the remainder 1.7 million to a request for grant proposals, open to all new grantees? Do we grant part of those current grantee budget requests and allocate more to the RFGP, or do we not grant the budget requests and just put all of it into an RFGP that would be open to new applicants? So as I mentioned, we went through all of this information, line by line item review of the budget requests, pros and cons of all the different scenarios on how to allocate the funds. And what the GRC came to is to basically go with scenario 1 and approve or allocate about 9.3 million to cover all of the grantee budget requests, both the maintenance and the expansion portions of each request. And then allocate the remainder, which is about 1.7 million, to the RFGP. We did have a pretty good discussion on how to, how to maybe incentivize more community-based organizations to apply for funds. So they wanted to prioritize about $400,000 of that remaining funding to CBO organizations because there are some gaps statewide, and there's been such a benefit of having the CBOs working with law enforcement, especially. So one of the recommendations was also to, prioritize $400,000 for that. So at this point,
So you ready
And-
for us to? make
yeah,
that-
so here's another chart that just kind of simplifies the additional funds requested and the recommended amount, which is just the requested amount rounded. So
Mhm. Can you actually go back to the prior slide? And I see
Sure.
Commissioner Freeman has his hand up. Actually, the slide before that. All right, go ahead, Commissioner Freeman.
I'm sorry, Chair. I was just gonna start the process of doing the motions,
Yep,
excluding each county that, so we can kind of go
Yep.
through that. So when you're ready for that, let me know.
I am absolutely ready for a motion.
So I will move to approve the recommendation from staff, excluding Douglas County.
And so I think let's just vote on the ones where we have abstentions or potential conflicts. Let's do those separately, and then let's group all of the rest of them together. So there will be, I'll declare a potential conflict on Lane County, Commissioner Freeman on Douglas County, Commissioner Bovet on Washington County, Commissioner Beach on Yamhill County. And I think that's it.
I'll make a motion to approve the ones you didn't just say.
Okay, great. Let's roll those all together.
I'll second that motion.
All right, Carol, would you take roll, please?
Yes. Chair Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes?
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
Commissioner Norton.
Yes.
That's all yeses, so it passes.
Great. Do you want to?
Then I'll move to approve the Douglas County.
Great. You want to call roll, Carol?
Once you get a
Oh,
second.
actually, we need a second.
Yeah,
The
but
motion
just not from Commissioner Freeman.
Yep. Got a motion from Vice Chair Bovet. Is there a second to that motion for?
And I'll second Chair Commissioner Beach.
Great. Would you please call roll, Carol?
Yes. Chair Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
I'll abstain.
Thank you. Commissioner McPherson
Yes.
and Commissioner Norton.
Yes.
Then it passes.
All right, so we.
I will move. Oh, sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
will move Yamhill County.
Is there a second?
Is this Freeman? I'll second.
Great. Motion by Vice Chair Bovet, seconded by Commissioner Freeman. Roll call, please.
Chair Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
I will abstain, please.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes?
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Norton.
Yes.
Then it passes.
And then I will move Lane County.
Motion, is there a second?
Is this
I'll
Freeman?
second.
I'll second. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll make an executive decision and take Commissioner Freeman second. So we have a motion by Vice Chair Bovet, seconded by Commissioner Freeman. Would you please call the roll?
Chair Solomon. Say that again. Did we miss him right? We lost him right at the moment. Am I good to continue the, can I continue the vote while he comes back on, or?
Let's take a recess just for a moment.
Okay.
Chair Solomon said that he would pop right back on by phone, that his computer was near dead. And so if we could wait just a moment and recess, that might be best.
Yeah, because this is Lane County's, and I think he needs to abstain.
There we go.
there
He's back.
Yeah, here I am. Right at the moment I was abstaining, my computer died, and so my apologies. I abstain on the Lane County vote.
And then Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
or Vice Chair Bovet,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Norton.
Yes.
And then it passes.
And I
And
cannot make
then-
the last one.
Yeah.
Okay, would someone make a motion to approve Washington County's allocation?
This is
So
Freeman. I'll
moved.
make, oh, go ahead. Somebody else. I'll second it. You're pretty quick there. I'll go second.
I was gonna say.
Okay, so Commissioner Beach, are you making that motion?
Yes.
Okay, great. And Commissioner Freeman, are you seconding that motion?
Yes.
Great. Carol, roll call, please.
Chair Solomon,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bovet,
Abstain.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner McPherson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Norton.
Yes.
And then it passes.
All right. I think that's all of them. Rima, is there anything else you need from us on this action item?
No, that's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Ken, are you giving the executive updates or agency updates?
Actually, today you won't have to suffer through anything from me. We're going to transition right to Ryan, our programs director, who's going to give a programs update for the commission.
Great. Welcome, Ryan.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Give me just a moment to screen share. What I wanted to do or begin doing was just with so many grant actions, opportunities, etc. going on, wanted to continue to provide you all with some updates on timelines as we march down the next several months. So am I screen sharing?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to try to work this chronologically for what will come to you first as we go through, although we'll be talking about a number of different dates for each of these grant programs. So to begin, there we go. There we are. The Restorative Justice Grant Program. So out of House Bill 5204, there was $4 million additionally allocated to this grant program for one-time funding to be used during this biennium. The funding for the majority of our existing grantees runs out in June of this year, 2024. And so our initial thought is much like what you just heard related to the marijuana program, is to check in and see where existing grantees are at with their current expenditures and this timeline that is quickly closing, and talk to our grant advisory committee, which is established by rule, on their preferences and priorities in allocating the $4 million. So the timeline at this point in time is exactly that. We've arranged a meeting on short order with the grant advisory committee to talk about their priorities for this new funding. And then we'll bring that update to you all in May as to how they have decided or suggest moving forward with the funding on the program. The next is specialty court. So again, out of the same budget bill, out of the short session, there was a large amount of $6.9 million of one-time gap funding provided to the specialty court grant program. specific to each county, kind of per county, a line item, or per court, pardon me, a line item for the county expenditures only. So this is a result partly of OJD, a shift of funding to OJD to cover OJD personnel, and an opportunity to address and expands maybe not the right word, because what the effort is to meet the unfunded requests from the grant program, again, specific to county needs, going back to last July. So we have already opened up a budget modification process with the existing courts that are receiving these funds. They have the next month to do that, to turn in a revised budget to include new funding. We'll then bring that information to you all in May, so your next meeting, to review and approve these amendments. And then we'll begin distributing those amendments to each of the counties for signature in June, in hopes that the new funding fits into a disbursement, the next disbursement, or a prearranged disbursement in the July timeframe. Justice Reinvestment, you heard this back in March, so just by way of a quick update from what you already know. Oh, I'll pause. I see Commissioner Beach's hand raised.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Actually, going back to that last slide, if we may, with regard to the specialty courts, just a clarifying question with the 6.9 million, the one-time gap funding. My understanding is that OJD has prioritized the allotment for court coordinators for each of the specialty courts. And I just wanted to clarify if that is the case. Is that going to be moving forward in further biennium as well, or is this just a one-time gap funding fill for this particular biennium?
Yeah, great question for a point of clarity. So what I'm referring to are the 6.9 is a one-time funding allocation for county needs. The transfer of funds to OJD the transfer of general funds to OJD for court coordinators is separate but related, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. So it's taken as part of the same action, but a different chunk of money. And that was roughly $4.5 million and is intended to then be something that is a part of a continuous funding plan moving forward. So the shift to OJD should remain in effect. So we can probably speculate that when we're all together next year for the 25-27 grant cycle for specialty courts, we'll be talking about county needs specifically, and OJD funds or OJD personnel should already be covered and or determined by OJD.
And Brian, just to be clear about that, so the money that is going to OJD to pay for the specialty court coordinators was previously paid for in the specialty court budget. The specialty court funding was not reduced by that amount, correct?
No, it was on a one-time basis. Yes, that's again getting into some complication, but for this biennium, they did do a one-time reduction to CJC's grant funds and gave them to OJD, but it was designated as one time as the language. So when we put in we should see our current service level for this funding return to normal for the next biennium.
Which
without OJD expenses
means that we get the money back that was previously going to fund the coordinators, so we'll have more to work with, correct?
Correct. And then exactly in the next grant cycle, there'll be more to work with for counties specifically.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So again, Justice Reinvestment, just recapping where you all left off in March. So we have opened up that grant application process for unallocated funds. It's roughly $785,000. We are capping requests at $100,000, and we will scale down from there should there be an excess of ask for what is available to fund. That application period closes in May. We'll then convene our grant review committee, as well as bring those recommendations before you all in June for processing in July. Organized Retail Theft Grant Program. If you recall, in the 23 session, this was a new grant program established to support law enforcement and community-based organizations addressing organized retail theft. So we've gone through the rulemaking process now. We brought those before you at last meeting. Those are in an open comment period right now, but should those close, we hopefully, or not should, when they close without any need to adjust, we will move quickly into an open application period for eligible applicants on that grant program. That should put us in about July's timeframe for your all's meeting to approve final awards and then begin distributing contracts and then disbursements. The jail-based medications for opioid use disorder, also a new grant program. Now, this was established in House Bill 4002 and then subsequently funded through the other bill. This is a new grant program being established from the ground up. The purpose being to support opioid use disorder treatment and transition planning in the particularly for people in custody. So both in local correctional facilities, city or county jails, or tribal correctional facilities. $10 million in total. 10% of the funds do have to be allocated to rural or tribal jails. And so with this process, it's tentative, I guess, is one way to describe it. And as you noted, or I'm noted there by the timeline statement, what we have right now is a projected timeline for county or city awards. We will be engaging in tribal consultation. We will use that information and input to determine the timeline for a process for tribal governments. So that is to be determined. But what we do know is we do have to do rulemaking for this grant program as established by the statute. So we'll begin that process, or we're in that process now of convening a rules advisory committee and then drafting those rules, much like you saw with the retail theft grant program, bring those before you all and then open them up for comment. That puts us in the July timeframe for opening a solicitation. Again, this is projected for the cities and counties operating jails. Bringing it then before you all hopefully in September after convening also a statutory obligated grant advisory committee to evaluate those applications. So the money on this one, given that it is for the 23-25 biennium, it is going to be out later in in shortening the period of time. But our goal with that is to at least extend the project period. So while funds may not be in hands of cities or counties until October at the earliest, we would allow them to date back where appropriate expenditures to July, when hopefully that process will have opened up. So that's the status on that one. And last, although it doesn't directly affect you all in terms of a decision-making body, I want to give you a brief update on the Behavioral Health Deflection Grant Program. For sake of space, I combined two complicated processes together in one slide. So this is collectively the Behavioral Health Program or Deflection Program established by 4002. There are two pieces to it. There was 23 counties that were given the opportunity to opt in early. So that process is already running. You'll see them referred to on the slide as an early adopter. And then there's the regular grant process that would be available to anybody else who's interested in these funds. In total, there are $21 million for counties and tribal governments. The funding for the tribes is established by the Impacts Grant Committee. The funding for counties is determined by a formula, which is OHA's burn formula for the Behavioral Health Resource Networks, with a slight modification because of both the tribal set aside and the minimum applicant or the minimum award defined in statute. So like the jail mood program, we are standing by on a timeline specific to tribal governments until we can conduct consultation. But what we have laid out for counties here is, you see, we did have our committee meet on April 2nd. They did approve the funding table. I'll go over that here in a moment. And we are now soliciting tentative plans from those 23 early adopter counties. Over the next month, then we will distribute those contracts to those individuals, as well as open the formal grant process for anyone else interested. That anyone else is not only the 13 counties who didn't opt in early, but that grant application cycle would also be used for any of the 23 early adopters to apply for their second 50% of funding. So it'll be the more robust grant application process, seeking input and narrative related to the statutory requirements for the grant application. This is all intended to then be brought before the final grant period is intended to be brought before the Impacts Committee in July, and then begin distributing those additional awards or amendments in August. So with this, I do have, as with the impacts committee did meet, I just wanted to show you a quick breakdown of the funding as they decided. So of the roughly $21 million, they made the determination to set aside 10% of those funds for tribal governments. So that was came to a total of $2 million and some change. There is also in statute the ability for up to 3% to be set aside by CJC for evaluative purposes of the grant program. The Impacts Review Committee took a very conservative, bite of that apple and is only just setting aside $150,000 at this stage, so that more money can go to the counties. And we do have some other funding we'll be utilizing to help get data collection and evaluation off the ground for the deflection program. And so finally, then the formula, when considering these set asides, there's $18.4 million available to counties, and it is available per formula in the manner you see here on the slide. That is it for my updates. If there are any questions.
Questions for Ryan? All right.
I see Commissioner Beach's hand again.
Oh, there we go. Great.
Thank you so much, Chair. Just a clarification, could you go back to that last slide, if
Sure.
possible? Just clarification that amount available to each county is based on the very complicated state community corrections percentage allocation for each county. Is that correct?
No.
Not the community corrections calculation, but the Behavioral Health Resource Network. So the Measure 110 Oversight and Accountability Council, the way they distributed those Measure 110 burn funding is the calculation. Again, modified slightly because what this program has is the tribal set aside and a minimum amount for any application. And so some awards by direct calculation, they changed when taking out those and adjusting for those set asides.
Perfect,
And
thank
I'll
you.
just add that unlike the grant and aid formula that's based on the number of people on felony supervision, the MOUD allocation is based on arrest, overdose deaths. I think there were a couple of other factors that determine the rate, which is very different from the 1145 formula.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. Any other questions from commissioners or anything from Ken that you want to share before we wrap up?
We're good from a staff perspective, Chair.
All right. Well, it always gives me great pleasure to give people part of their day back. I was hopeful that we would get through this agenda in far less than 2 hours. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all.
Hey, Carol.
Yes.
I think she was just saying thank you, Carol.